been watching the Olympics at all?
Yeah. Beth is one of the dedicated Olympics watchers. I was watching
like she's got the
water ballet this morning because that's important.
Yeah.
I can't get to the office without a little water ballet.
Yeah, I mean it's important stuff, I guess. I mean, does the U.S. have a chance?
On, I guess.
Does the U.S. have a chance to win gold? Because that's where the
inverted moonwalk. I mean, come on, how can you not win?
Okay, on that note, I'm going to do the introduction. On this episode of the AAF Exchange, the economy on recession watch, a plan to reduce the federal debt, an update on child internet safety, and the DOJ's antitrust win over Google. Joining us is AAF President Douglas Holtz-Eakin, and later on, AAF's Director of Technology and Innovation Policy, Jeff Westling. But first, Doug, you're up. Welcome. Thanks for coming back on. Great
to be back. Tan, rested, and ready?
Yeah, you've been on vacation. I was on vacation, so it's been a while since we actually did an episode.
I think it's good for us to be apart.
Yeah. July was a good month. So before we jump into everything, what's been on your mind recently?
CMS. You know, I like to go to the beach, pop open a nice red, and think about CMS. And true to form, they're irritating me to no end. You know, there were a lot of changes to the Part D program in the Inflation Reduction Act. The one that's gotten the most attention is the so-called negotiations. Put that aside, there was also a radical redesign of the basic Part D benefit that capped the exposure of seniors to out-of-pocket costs, but also protected the taxpayers. They used to pick up 80% of the cost of the drugs in the catastrophic region, put that liability on the plans and the manufacturers. In general, the plans have to pay a lot more. If that's true, the plans have to pay a lot more. They have to get the money from somewhere. So inevitably, there was going to be pressure on premiums. I could see that. I wrote some things about this. Anyone could see that. Evidently, CMS just woke up to this possibility and realized that, they're going to announce premiums for 2025 right before the election. And the cost is tripling, so premiums would have to, oh dear. So they have now created a demonstration project, a premium stabilization demonstration. Every Part D plan is eligible, so that's a pretty big demonstration project. And they're going to just toss a $7 billion in there to cover the costs, and this drives me crazy. It drives me crazy for many reasons. Number one, the whole point was to expose the plans to more costs so they would negotiate much more strongly with the manufacturers and get lower drug prices. Everyone wants that. This is the original intent of the program. They're undercutting that incentive. Number two, it's a 3-year stabilization. So the electoral panic they've papered over with a 3-year demonstration project. What happens at the end of the 3 years? For 3 years, they told the plans, don't change your business model. Don't do anything different. We're going to tiptoe up to the expiration of this thing, and everyone's going to have the same freak out. Mm-hmm. This money will never go away. So I'm not at all unhappy about this.
Yeah.
I just, I thought they had done a really good thing with the redesign. They probably should have phased it in. They certainly should have thought more carefully about it. Now they've undone it.
Yeah. So this was all from this redesign was from the IRA, the Inflation Reduction.
In the IRA, yeah. But it was something that many people had talked about, both sides of the aisle. AAF had written on this.
Right.
The original design of Medicare Part D was have private sector entities negotiate as fiercely as you could get them to, prescription drug plans and manufacturers, to get the cost of the drugs down. That's a way the plans could make some money and seniors would benefit. And we had drifted away from that and turned it into a sort of tax and spend entitlement. We were going back to the original design, and they just, in the stroke of a sort of administrative pen, again, not through Congress, they undid what Congress passed.
Yeah.
It's irritating from many perspectives.
I generally am of the opinion things should go through Congress, so that's definitely something that would irritate.
Yes.
That irritates me. But also, just before we move on, I just want to say John Walker, our policy analyst for healthcare, has a good piece on this.
He has a nice piece.
I think it was out either last night. It was in this morning's Dish. There's a nice link to it.
Yeah.
So
he's written it up, and I get the chance to write the Friday weekly checkup on a health policy topic. I can't imagine what it will be.
I'm sitting on pins and needles waiting for that one. I'll already start getting the social media together for that one. All right, let's jump into what everything today. last week we had this jobs report that was well below expectations, and the markets have certainly been, reacting to that. Today we had a little bit better news on the jobless claims. I saw that right before coming in
Fell
here.
17,000.
So
Not exactly a meltdown.
Yeah. So I mean, what are your reaction to these reports?
So the jobs report was weaker, but not in my view weak. The part that was weakest got the least attention, and that was, one more time, this is now the third month in a row, all of the jobs we got, 140,000 odd jobs, were in government and health. Like, we don't have broad-based job growth right now. That's a fact. So that was one thing. The thing the markets reacted the most to was the unemployment rate jumping to 4.3%. But that went up for the, quote, right reason. A lot more people came into the labor force. They just haven't found jobs yet. It's not like the household survey showed a lot of people, getting laid off. So it was weaker. The Fed wants it weaker. It's in the interests of bringing it to balance that it be a little weaker, but it wasn't absolutely weak. And so I thought people should just take a deep breath about it. They didn't. They completely freaked out on Monday,
Right.
as you know. Dow's down 1,200, 3% decline across equity markets, triggered in part by this episode in Japan on the Bank of Japan raising rates, and there've been a lot of people borrowing in Japan to invest in the U.S. Made that borrowing more expensive. So some of this is just a market event as people unwind their trades.
Right.
It doesn't appear to be an economic event. Like, the market event happened. On Tuesday, we got the ISM, which shows the service sector, that's most of employment, and it was up strongly, both the employment part and the output part. So it's hard to call this an economy in or entering recession.
Yeah.
It's an economy that's cooling. It's
Yeah.
appropriately cooling.
I remember last week you mentioned it in your reaction to the report in your video that you do, and other people had mentioned it on air, but the SOM rule was triggered. So that's...
SOM rule was triggered.
Yeah.
The SOM rule, for those who don't follow this stuff, is you look at the unemployment rate compared to the 12-month average, and if it's gone up by half a percentage point, it's a recession indicator. So we're there. What she has said, the originator of the rule, Claudia Somm, is, look, given what's going on with immigration, I'm not sure this applies right now. Because it's meant to tell you something about labor demand, and the decline in demand pops up the unemployment rate. Most of what's going on is immigration and labor supply. So it's a misapplication of the lesson. And so, again, put that one aside. So economies are always hard to figure out in real time. This one's no different. I think given what the Fed had said after the last meeting about we're very close to being evenly balanced between inflation and employment risks, that if that's true, then we should be very close to evenly neutral on interest rates, and they would call their policy restrictive. So I expect them to cut in September.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's an open and shut case. Like, I think you can make a case to not cut, but I assume they're going to. I would expect at this point 25 basis points. It looks like a lot of people are moving toward 50. I consider this all overreaction to the events on Monday. And again, today's claims are going to be what the Fed is going to evaluate between now and when they get to the September meeting. They got claims. They're saying, hey, things are pretty good. They're going to get another employment report. They're going to get two inflation reports, one PCE, one CPI. They might arrive in September with a very different view of the economy. We'll see.
Yeah, there's still a long way to go. I mean, so you think about a 25 basis point cut is what we're looking at right now. If all we had was
on the merits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what about this? I saw this yesterday. I think there was a Yahoo Finance article about this where they were talking about should the Fed cut earlier than their September meeting? Like,
that belongs in a Yahoo category somewhere. No, the Fed. There's no reason for the Fed to react to the big market move. Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee, old colleague of mine, said it best. He was asked on CNBC. He said, nowhere in the Fed's mandates to say the stock market should be happy. He's right.
Yeah.
Right? Go figure that out. The economy itself is what they have to focus on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the only times that they've ever done something like that is like at a catastrophic event, like, the 2008 housing crash, and then there was one in
We've seen intermarket moves, no question about it. Like, suppose today, instead of, claims dropping by 17,000,
right,
they rose by 50,000. I'm telling you, the phones would be busy.
Yeah.
Like, that would be like, whoa, maybe we completely misjudged that, because that's a real-time indicator. That's
Right.
like right now, we know what happened, last month in the jobs report. That seems weak. Now it's falling apart. Sure, then you might see the Fed do something,
Yeah.
but these data don't support that.
All right. Well, we'll have to pay attention to the next inflation reports, and well, I'm sure we'll be talking about this one more time before the next Fed meeting. And
It is inevitable.
but for now, let's turn to another favorite topic of yours: the federal debt. AAF submitted a plan to reduce the federal debt at the Peterson Foundation's Solution Initiative to their 2024 Solutions Initiative. In that plan, AAF submitted several ideas on how to tackle the debt problem. Walk us through the overview of that plan.
So the mandate is to, quote, solve the fiscal problem. And I would say the fiscal problem is best described as stabilize debt relative to GDP as quickly as possible, and then have it head south on a steady basis. And to do that, you need to definitely control spending, and we've had the conversation about the entitlements. They're the biggest chunk of the spending. They're growing the fastest. So our plan has Social Security reform, Medicare reform. The Medicare reforms are things that have been written up and actually are on the website under our health and economy model. We estimated the impacts over the 10-year. This extrapolates them over a longer period. Social Security reforms are pretty straightforward, plain vanilla. Let's take care of Social Security. And then discretionary spending is less interesting from a budgetary point of view, but Gordon Gray, who was the fiscal policy director at the onset of this project, has since gone on to a new appointment. Gordon's a big believer that we are under funding the Defense Department. So we actually have increases in defense discretionary spending in this, pretty substantial. So on the spending side, overall we're reducing spending, but we're concentrating on the entitlements. On the revenue side, it is inevitable, if you're going to move quickly and get the debt stabilized, that there be a revenue component to it. The spending pieces don't change fast enough. We do two things which are not completely novel, but which are notable. One is to have a carbon tax and just dump all of the largely inconsequential Biden expensive efforts on the climate. I mean, it's just, we are spending...
You're talking about the regulations there.
The regulations, all the $1 trillion of tax credits. My view of the universe is that we have accomplished nothing, because you have to accomplish something on a global scale. You haven't heard the U.S. efforts make a big difference in other countries trying to meet emissions targets. John Kerry, Special Ambassador for Climate, announced nothing in 3 years. So I view this as a grand failure, to be honest. So do a carbon tax and take care of the rest of the tax code, reduce distortions in it as much as possible, and we go to a destination-based cash flow tax of the type that was proposed by the House in the last tax reform. It's a very efficient tax. It's also a consumption-based tax. So we're going to just tax consumption more heavily, give incentives to save, invest, and grow. And the key in the architecture is, if you do, quote, static scoring, you just reduce the spending, look at the tax increases and how they do, we stabilize debt relative to GDP at about 100%, close to where we are now. And it takes a lot to do that.
Yeah.
But in doing so, we have done a pro-growth fiscal reform, and when they scored our plan, they said, oh, you're going to get much better growth out of this. And so the growth produces a downward trajectory, and we get the debt to GDP down to the 70% range by 2050. So that's great progress, I think. And if the U.S. could accomplish something like that, I'd be thrilled.
Yeah, I think the magnitude of how much goes into that plan just underscores how big of an issue this is.
Certainly,
we face.
In doing it, we just looked at each other. Gordon, now Jordan Herring, the new fiscal policy director, and I, and you realize just how deep we're in it, because you have to try so hard just to get things to stabilize, and so, that's in a spreadsheet. In the real world, it is very hard.
Right. And as we go on, it's going to get harder and harder.
Yes.
And it's going to get more and more politically painful to do it as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
we can't take the politics out of solving this issue because we don't operate on a spreadsheet.
Right. I agree. And so the politics drove us to a really inefficient and ineffective climate policy. On a spreadsheet, it's easy to get to a very efficient economist dream.
Yeah.
An upstream carbon tax, border adjusted, all the bells and whistles. I don't know how you get there politically. We haven't done that yet.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice. As we've said, I think many times in the last year, it'd be nice if there was a nice conversation about this as we turn into complete election mode.
I give the Peterson folks credit for sponsoring this effort and funding the research that went into it on 6 different think tanks and publicizing the results. They're trying to get people to pay attention, and good for them.
Yeah, it's great. And I also look forward to seeing Jordan's piece on this. I know she's doing like a deep dive into
she's doing
all
a
of
write-up,
into this, and it'll be great to have her on to later on when that's finished, just to go through everything. Yeah,
she's already written an important piece on Social Security and what happens if you do nothing. Benefits get cut. She's going to go through this larger fiscal plan, working on some things on the tax code because 2025 is going to be a very busy year.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, Doug, I can't let you go without doing your favorite part.
No, you can.
And I'm going to make you sit through
your podcast.
Well, last time...
You're czar of the podcast.
Well, last time we did a trivia question, remember, I accidentally gave you the answer.
I like that approach. Try that again.
It's a little bit of a redemption for myself, too. All right, so this was a paper written last week... from a paper that was written last week by Jacob Johnson on renting, a 5% cap on rent, which the proposed 5% cap on rent would not lower overall costs and could result in between how much in additional cost for renters over a 5-year period.
Oh, I don't know, but I think it's $5,000.
Yeah, it's you're in the range. It's between $3,500 and $6,000 is what he estimated.
Something like that.
And even more, to add on to that, it would cost. He estimates it would cost roughly $1 billion in administrative costs.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
The number that stuck in my head out of the paper was that half of the rental units in the United States would be affected.
Yeah.
I had no idea it was that big.
That's stunning.
It's only corporate owners.
Yeah.
And so that's amazing to me. I thought there was a lot more mom and pop non-corporate rental units out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, looking as somebody who hasn't gone through the rental process in a while, I mean, I got lucky and found a mom and pop one, but there is quite a lot of the amenities filled rental properties out there here in DC.
I guess if you count by buildings, it wouldn't be half, but the
but the units in those.
But the units in there, you get a lot of units.
Right, because you have like 7 floors worth of units and all that. So I mean, this 5% cap, this is coming. This is
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to happen. But where did this proposal come from? Like, this is something that I know has been tried at some local areas.
Rent control. The idea of rent control has been tried in municipalities across the country at various points in time. It has been a uniform failure.
Mm-hmm.
What happens. You cap the rent. Now you have an incentive to hold on to these rent-controlled apartments because they're cheap. People don't want to live there anymore, so they on the black market rent them out to friends and go live somewhere else. Landlords aren't making enough money to keep up the buildings, so the quality goes down and they become less attractive properties, and it just spirals south. It turns out you're just creating bad apartments. Mm-hmm. So most places have abandoned it. But the Biden administration is good at finding ideas that won't work and publicizing them, and here we have it.
Yeah, I found the paper interesting as a renter myself, just looking at it and seeing him walk through all the issues behind it. But it's a good paper, and people should go read it.
It's the classic appeal thing, right? I would love to have my apartment and have it be cheaper.
Yeah.
That's not the bargain that you're being offered.
Right.
You get to have an apartment that's way worse than the one you're in. Cheaper.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not as attractive.
Yep. All right, Doug, thanks for joining us. We're going to turn to Jeff, but look forward to having you back on in a few weeks.
Appreciate it.
Let's turn to Jeff Westling, who has had a pretty busy week.
Yeah, you could say that.
I feel like they just decided to do all the policy at once on you.
Well, it's the tech world. Things heat up, then they quiet down, and right now we're in one of those heated up cycles.
Yeah. And all this in the backdrop of you still have to watch the Olympics, too.
I mean, Devin Booker's popping off right now. The best player who's willing to sacrifice for the team right now. He's playing a role. We got a bunch of superstars, but Booker's who's holding them all together.
You think USA is going to get this done?
I mean, yes. I think they're going to get it done. Could they not? Sure. But, if you're not betting on USA, you don't watch basketball.
It's one of the surefire ones, and unfortunately, it really sets us up for disappointment if we don't win.
Well, a lot of these other teams are getting better, and if one team gets hot, it's a single game elimination. You never quite know.
That's the thing about it is, in a 7-game series, I take the USA 10 out of 10 times.
Oh, for sure.
But when we get to these one and done series, like, it's hard to fathom, but all these guys could have one bad game all at the same time.
Or just one guy on the other team just does not miss from 3.
Yeah. All right, so now that we've given the people what they want and talking about the Olympics, let's talk about tech and innovation
Are we
policy.
supposed to do it the other way around, like where you have something to look forward to, and so that way they sit
maybe
through
we'll talk more at the end. We'll see.
Who knows? Yeah, you might need to stick around and find
out. All right. Anyways, last week the Senate passed its Child Internet Safety Bill that would impose new safety and privacy requirements for minors on social media. So, Jeff, just generally talk what is this bill? What happened? What's going on?
Sure. This is a bill that's been pushed for a while now. Senator Blackburn and Senator Blumenthal have been leading it. Basically, what it would do is it would impose a duty of care on social media companies and other companies as well, streaming services, things like that, to act in the best interest of minors that are using the website. And it's designed to go after some of what they call design features, so things like endless scrolling and kind of the algorithm promoting content. So they're trying to say, this isn't a content regulation, but there's been concerns that if a company is worried that if I promote any kind of content that could be, mental health related, it could be like close to suicide type content, and that could drive us to be found liable because we've been pushing this content that maybe could be harmful, maybe could be beneficial. So there's a lot of concern about things like age verification, where maybe I'm not going to allow minors onto my site at all. There's things about maybe I'm not going to have algorithms that promote content that people want to find because maybe that could lead to violations of the law. They've made changes over time to assuage some of those concerns, but it's not entirely gone, so it's kind of interesting to see how this moves forward. The important thing to note, it was a pretty overwhelming vote in favor of the bill, though. I think it was 97-3, or only 3 people opposed. I don't know if everyone else voted for it, but they had widespread support for this. There's less certainty in the House, though.
Yeah, interesting. We'll get to that in a second. But I mean, so you're talking about like some of these social media companies have already sort of started implementing this stuff. And you're talking about like the parental controls and things like that. That hasn't done enough to dissuade any of these concerns?
No, they haven't done enough, because I think a lot of the parental controls are good, but there's still a lot of these design features that are just built into these apps that people are concerned with. And I think, when you think of things like endless scrolling, it's the idea that maybe the kids are spending too much time on social media because the app kind of keeps giving you enough to keep going and seeing the next video, seeing the next Instagram reel or TikTok or whatever app you're using. So I think there's still concerns there, but they're like you said, they're doing a lot right now, and a lot of what's going on is very beneficial to the parents who are getting more tools to see how their kids are interacting online, and also beneficial for the kids, where you're getting content that's helping you deal with problems in your daily life that maybe when I was a kid we didn't have that. If there weren't kids in my school going through the same things, I don't know who I would talk to. But now it's like I can find people across the world that have similar issues and problems that can help me deal with what I'm going through. So there's a lot of benefits too that I think we just are a little concerned could be lost in translation.
Yeah, because I know we always talk about this, but one of the things that when we talk about some of your issues is it seems that Europe always tends to go first in this sort of stuff, and so we have sort of this experimental lab to see how it plays out over there. Have they done anything that should be like sort of buyer's remorse type situation?
So they've done less specifically on kids, but they have the Digital Services Act, which is kind of their big content regulation, and obviously they don't have the First Amendment, so like they've got less restrictions on what they can do. There's been a lot of things in Europe where we've seen governments say, this is harmful, we don't want this out there. And it's like, is this really harmful content, or is this just content that might not go with the prevailing narrative? So that's always a concern in the background too, is we in the United States are fine, or not fine, but the best way to beat bad content is good content. That's kind of the general mindset we've had. It doesn't always work, but it's something I believe in, which is just, let's let that open discourse happen, and let's, if there's harmful content out there, let's have other people push it away, drive it down. Let's kind of get away from that. So it's hard to say exactly what's going to happen. The Europeans don't have like a one-for-one that I'm aware of, but maybe there's a lot of things that are somewhat similar.
Right. Parts of other bills and parts of other laws and things like that. You have a couple of great pieces on this, so if people need to find them, we'll obviously give the links to that so that people can go read more in depth. But just, before I let you go, what you mentioned the House, it's still got to go there, it's still got to go through the whole legislative process. What are the likelihood we see this pass and get signed by the president?
Before the election, almost zero. The speakers come out and said they don't like the bill. Leadership in the relevant committees said they don't like the bill. So this just probably will not happen before the election. They're not going to give the Biden administration a win. But in a lame duck, I don't know for sure. They've said they don't like the bill, but that could just be we're not going to act on it immediately. Again, that the overwhelming support in the Senate has me thinking there might be more to this than we're giving it credit for. The general consensus is it probably won't move in the House, but
I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the next Congress does because, the problem with a lame duck, and Doug talks about this all the time, is you have other issues you have to tackle, and there's only so many days you can get that done. Like we have the debt ceiling coming back, and just, looking at the real world, it's not just...
And to that point, this bill has taken a long time because it just hasn't been a priority for even the leadership in the Senate. They took a very long time between passing this out of committee and getting a floor vote. And to your point, if there's not a lot of legislative days and there's other priorities, it might just not have too much of a serious path forward.
Right. So I can't let you leave without asking you about another big issue that happened this week, and of course that is the DOJ's antitrust win over Google search yesterday, or not yesterday, but a few days ago now. You posted your piece a couple of days ago about this, but what happened here?
Yeah, so the DOJ, under the Trump administration, actually brought a case alleging that Google has a monopoly in search and that they are entering into what are these exclusive deals, is what they're calling them for the most part. They're not really exclusive. They're just for the default search engine. When you buy an Apple iPhone and you download Safari, or it comes with Safari, you don't need to download Google search as the default. It just is there. But they're paying a lot of money for that, and there was concern that this is driving out competition. Things like Bing just do not have the same search query, and Google has monopoly power there. So the court did a lot of analysis and found that those default agreements have a significant effect on what consumers choose to use. And they found that they're anti-competitive agreements. Google has monopoly power in search, and also search text ads, which is a separate component of the case that isn't talked about quite as much, but it's also really important. They found them the liable under Section 2 of the Sherman Act, and Google's going to appeal. They've got some really strong arguments. I think the court, overemphasized how strong those default preferences are. They also discount a lot of the competitive benefits that come with that. Like one of the big ones is Mozilla, the browser, has Google as default. Google pays them. Yeah. And according to the court case, it was like 80% of their revenue comes from this agreement. Wow. So if you forbid Google from paying for default there, Mozilla might not have enough money to keep going, and that loses competition in the browser market. Right. And this iPhone, you want your thing to come out working perfectly. That's competition in the smartphone market. So I think they've got some strong arguments on appeal. It's not clear. The judge did a great job, I'll be honest. Judge Mehta did a fantastic job writing this opinion. It was very well written. It was very clear why he was coming to what he was coming to. The interesting thing after they do all these appeals will be remedies. What can they actually do to address these harms? So there's still a lot to be decided. I think the thing to kind of highlight, though, is that this is kind of how antitrust law should work. When there's something that is arguably anti-competitive, bring a case and convince the judge that the anti-competitive harms outweigh the benefits, that they have monopoly power, and that's what they did there. So it was an interesting result, but not one that I expected. But I like that the process is working. We don't need to change the law. That's something we can talk about on another podcast. But
I know there's a lot of talk about changing the antitrust laws and just get. But it's interesting. And maybe I missed this part of it. But so I know a lot of antitrust revolves around consumer protection and consumer benefits. How did the judge square that away with that principle? Yeah.
So the judge kind of squared that pretty decently. He was looking at competition and saying that consumers are going to have less choice in search, and they have Google, which he admitted gained its monopoly power through being a better business, and that's not illegal.
Yeah.
And so he was very clear about that. When they acquired the monopoly power, they were not acting illegally or against the law. It's when they started trying to maintain that with these agreements. So I think what he's saying is that it would be beneficial for consumers if they don't have these default agreements, so other companies can better compete, achieve that kind of scale that you need where you have enough data and information to better give the result that the consumer's looking for. So if you have more choices for search, theoretically that's better for consumers. So I don't think he really dived into the consumer focus as much, but he definitely dived into the competition questions. And that's really what the consumer welfare standard's about. It's about competition and having firms being able to compete, and not necessarily protecting the individual firms, because that's where people get lost. It's like, oh, well, Bing can't compete, therefore we need to. No, that's not how it works. But it's saying the competitive landscape as a whole restricts the ability for rivals to come in. And that's what he kind of focused on. And I don't necessarily agree with his decision, but he did base it in that same kind of standard.
Interesting. Well, Jeff, thanks for coming on and breaking down those two issues in a very busy week for you. Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you one final question. Actually, did you want to do the trivia question this week?
I suck at these, but happy to. I don't know why we don't do Phoenix Suns trivia. I would do so much better at that.
See, we do the trivia to highlight other AAF research papers.
I don't read our work.
Jacob Jensen had a great piece on rent control and putting a cap on rent, and so I asked Doug about that just to have because I'm interested in it as a renter myself.
Well, Doug's read that, so
right. He got it in the ballpark.
Oh,
correct
fun
today.
story. Jacob Jensen went to Brophy College Prep in Phoenix, Arizona. You know who else went there? This guy. Go Broncos.
So maybe you would know this trivia just based off of that fact alone that you guys went to the same.
Let's find out.
So a 5% cap on rent would not lower the overall costs and could result in between blank and blank in additional costs for renters over a 5-year period.
I don't know, an increase.
What's that?
An increase in cost?
It would be an increase, correct. But
Nailed it.
But it would be an increase of between $3,500 and $6,000. Isn't that wild?
That's wild.
A 5% cap could increase that much for renters over a 5 year.
I don't like that. Let me tell you, as a current renter.
And for the regulatory costs, it would cost an additional roughly $1 billion in administrative costs.
That is a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. As a renter, I don't quite like that proposal either. Doug had a nice, little rant or conversation about how the most of these rent control or proposals at the local level haven't really worked out to begin with. Anyways, it's a great paper and people should go read it.
I will
especially
go read
if
it
you're
now.
a renter. I hope the golf game's getting better, but thanks.
That's the thing about golf. It gets better, but
does it actually?
It does. But when you're starting from so low, getting better isn't that impressive.
Yeah. You've gone from 130 to 120 score.
Well, I broke 100 for the first time since I was a kid.
Well, that's a great win. Anytime I break 100, I'm the happy.
I was very ecstatic.
Camper. Anyways, Jeff, thanks for coming on and talking about these issues in a very busy week for you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.